Baseball. Major League Baseball is getting its first debut on Run It Back here.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about this big Shohei Ohtani story.
See, look at that. You like the drama, right? Instead of talking about the Yankees, instead of talking about the drama, you want to talk about gambling, right? You want to talk about scandals.
And I'm not
You want
even
to
a
talk
gambler.
about robbery.
Yeah.
What kind of shenanigans is this?
So, listen, first of all, Shohei Ohtani, the fact that not enough people know who he is, I think that's a crime in and of itself. Baseball needs to figure that out. This guy is doing something that we haven't really seen since, like, the Babe Ruth years.
Yeah.
He's hitting at extremely high level, and he's also a top 3 or 4 pitcher inside of his own rotation, too, as well. I don't know if he's, like, Cy Young level, but I do think he is a very solid pitcher, like, above average amongst MLB standards, which if you look at baseball in terms of like its inception when it started, this is kind of how the game was designed to be played. The pitcher is supposed to be a hitter also too. Got away from that a lot too with the DH, but I digress. He has caught himself up in a major kind of gambling story. Now, all accounts and his testimony so far, and it's not even testimony, it's not like he was doing it in front of a grand jury, but he spoke in front of ESPN, I think it was either today or yesterday, through a new interpreter, which we'll get to later. But he's claiming his innocence. He's claiming theft, amongst other things, that he had no idea of anything that the former interpreter was doing. But I'll kind of try to give as
a little
quick
overview.
overview of kind of what's more or less going on. So it was reported a week ago that Shohei Ohtani's former interpreter, his name is Ippei Mizuhara, okay?
That was good.
Yeah.
That was good.
I'm
You
trying
practiced.
here.
You
I'm
practiced.
I was reading a lot about this today, yeah, so I wanted to make sure I didn't want to butcher anybody's name. But Ippei Mizuhara, okay, is caught up apparently in a gambling scandal with an illegal bookmaker in California. I'll get to his name later. I think it's Matthew Boyer is the guy's name. Someone coming out of California, okay? I don't want to go through too many things because obviously there's a tremendous federal investigation going on.
Yeah.
So I want to try and make sure I get the names right, not misimplicate anybody. But by my readings, Ippei Mizuhara had something like a $4.5 to almost $5 million gambling debt that was owed to this bookmaker in California, I believe, was where the business was. The money that was paid to Boyer was paid of one of Shohei Ohtani's bank accounts. I'm assuming it's his primary account. It's his former.
Not necessarily, he's got $700 million.
I don't know the
that
fraud.
That
could be multiple accounts.
Emergency fund.
There could be all sorts of things going on. Now, I think the tricky part of this whole situation is Ippei Mizuhara originally said to ESPN last week, then this is quoted both in CBS Sports and Yahoo Sports. He said that Shohei Ohtani was a friend. He was helping him pay off former gambling debts. A day later, Ippei then says, oh no, Shohei Ohtani didn't know anything about this money. These were my own debts. He had no idea. And now Shohei Ohtani comes out and finally speaks, okay, and says that he didn't know anything about this. He's going fraud, there's like a D word or something. I forget the other. But fraud, obviously, there's a major fraud going on here in the investigation. The other part of this, too, now, is that Shohei Ohtani's representation, a man by the name of Nez Bolello, okay? Now, baseball fans might actually know this guy's name. He's right now, I guess, still one of Shohei Ohtani's representatives, but he was involved in a scandal much earlier involving, you and I were talking about this pre-show, Ryan Braun. So Ryan Braun was brought up on charges for, I think he was up for a 50-game suspension by the MLB for performance PEDs.
Yep.
The whole biogenesis thing that came out and the reports. So he went on like a crusade, like through trials and whatnot. He actually was able to get one of the lead investigators or handlers kicked off. I'm not going to go into all details about that, but something racist / prejudicially related to the investigator towards Ryan Braun. And this guy, Nez Bolello, was also involved. Apparently, he was like he was involved in the sample handling, the urine sample handling for one Braun. So Braun got off on the charges. Fast forward a year later, it was found out he was implicated and proven to being one of the biogenesis people and users. And the whole thing was all for naught. Somebody lost their job for no reason. He didn't even end up getting suspended. I forget how that whole story turned out. Again, you're talking 12 years ago. Yeah. But I only bring up that name because he's now one of Shohei Ohtani's representatives, and he hasn't spoken anything or been seen since this story came out about Shohei. So I lead all this up just to sit here, and I'll give you my perspective. When I heard about the story change, I definitely got a little bit skeptical there because I'm just like, I think I don't watch a ton of baseball like I once did. Used to be my favorite sport. I'll get into why I don't really pay attention to it as much anyway. But Shohei Ohtani, I think, is awesome. For the reasons that I said. I mean, seems like a worker. He is a star I think that baseball really needs. I think they need to do a better job of marketing him. But a guy who can hit an extremely high level, gets a $700 million contract, which is record-breaking, can also pitch. I mean, the value of a player like that to your baseball team, that's awesome. But the other thing that this brings in is the whole gambling aspect of it. Mm-hmm. This isn't the first time baseball has had a highly prominent star involved in the gambling. They're keeping out arguably one of the greatest baseball players of all time from the Hall of Fame for something he did as a manager. But when I kind of link up these facts, show you the different things that's out there, give me your thoughts on this story as a whole and how it affects Major League Baseball.
Yeah, listen, I think it's just tough and it's a very sensitive topic, right?
Absolutely.
And for us just trying to, point out, the facts and try to, take away opinions, but trying to interpret what's happening.
Yep.
And so
far for the record, Shohei Ohtani, no criminal anything
he
towards him at
vehemently
all.
denied that he didn't know anything,
You're innocent until proven guilty,
So, I mean, here's the situation, right?
Sure.
Obviously, Shohei is a foreigner, right?
Yes.
And so
that's a big part of it, too.
Initially, now, right, this is just my assumption, right? This is just my opinion in trying to dissect the situation. That, let's say his interpreter was doing this, right? And his interpreter was in charge of his account to some degree. And so he's illegally gambling, right? And so ultimately, they may have perceived it to be not that big of a deal, right? Because technically gambling is legalized in the United States.
As long as it was on other sports too. It couldn't have been on baseball
itself. So then that's a different layer, right?
Yeah,
there's just gambling in general is legalized in the United States, through avenues like FanDuel,
provided
drafting,
through the legal process.
Right, exactly, in specific states.
Yes.
However,
and state laws vary, correct?
Yeah, state laws do vary. I think it's only about like 12 to 18
that
states
have
legalized gambling.
Okay.
But there is an underground world, right, where you have bookies and so on and so forth.
Which we've had for much longer.
Right, for much longer. So now what I'm saying is in this particular situation, it is possible, right, that they thought it wasn't that big of a deal, right? Hey, my friend just paid off my debts. My friend that has $700 million is paying off my debts, right? Hey, Major League Baseball, no big deal. My friend, help me out. The Dodgers fired me for crossing a line between friend and professionalism, right? However, the federal government's involved now. Right? The federal government is involved because several millions of dollars, right, have been wired from one party to another. And that party that received the funds, right, allegedly
what it seems to be an illegal setup.
An illegal setup. So now all of a sudden there's a slew of other federal violations that may have occurred.
Yes.
And so where Shohei Ohtani's lawyers, representatives, and other parties that are invested in his success may have laid the law of the United States land to say, hey, you've passed the point that this is just a Major League Baseball issue that you could just get a slap on the wrist. The federal government is involved. The federal government's involved. Now all of a sudden,
whole different ballgame.
Exactly. Now you have to bring in that particular that particular enterprise, their dealings, right? How did Shohei's interpreter find them, right? What's their client list? How long have this been going on? And it seems like, and I don't know if I'm having a misunderstanding of this 4.5 million was losses, right? This was surrounded by, a series of transactions.
This is interpreter gambler losses.
How long was it going on? Were there other wins? Were there other losses prior in smaller denomination? 500,000, $1 million, so on and so forth. Those things we don't know.
You're saying Shohei more or less is going to probably have to show other losses.
Well, right? So is it possible that the federal government is involved because there's been a series of transactions that they flagged? We don't know, right? We absolutely don't know.
Yes.
So I think to just the point of saying all that is to reference why did the story potentially change in a day? It went from like, hey, one buddy helped another buddy to wait, now the federal government's involved. Did you know about this?
I got what you're saying.
You didn't, then he took it. If he took it without your knowledge,
the only person we know that lied is Ippei Mazuhara.
Exactly, but that's the thing. If he took it without your knowledge, if he took it without your permission, right, then essentially that is theft.
Sure.
Even though he has access to your accounts without your permission, right? A whole other slew of charges come into play.
Sure.
So I think all of a sudden, someone explaining all of this to Shohei may have made him realize how serious the situation is. Because again, is it possible that he confused gambling legally, right, and just gambling in the United States illegally, and why they're so different?
Sure.
And so that might be where we are today.
Yep.
Look, ultimately, he came out, he spoke to the media, he said
Seemed
he
like a
wasn't
strong statement
involved.
too. Strong
very
denial.
strong statement.
By all accounts, for the record, too, all those in the Dodgers organization and other major league players that know him say they highly doubt that this is something that Shohei Ohtani would do. He's about that work. He's about that action. He's about just being the best baseball player he can possibly be.
Yeah, and listen, I don't want to judge, right? But
I'm with you.
How well does he know American sports gambling,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Maybe where he came from,
Yes.
or other sort of global gambling, gambling, syndications
Sure.
and stuff like that. That maybe that would have made a little bit more
Yes.
sense if he was sort of gambling, with someone from his country or something like that. But for all indications, it looks like he's innocent in this situation, and hopefully Major League Baseball comes out clean in this,
Yeah.
and Shohei comes out clean in this, because he is the star, and we don't want to see him get in trouble. You brought up Pete Rose,
Sure.
right, and the stuff that he went through, and he's. You can argue he's more famous for being banned than, being let in, and he had a phenomenal career.
Sure.
So ultimately, Major League Baseball doesn't need this black eye. Now, you can argue any attention is good attention, even if it's bad
fair.
attention, right?
Sure.
So now everybody is focused on
This is
Major
something
League
people
Baseball.
are definitely talking about.
Opening day is in a couple of days,
Yes.
and so now baseball's on the top of everyone's mind
Yeah.
and radar. So let's see what happens. But ultimately, I think most of us are rooting for a successful outcome.
Me too.
Because Shohei is a superstar.
Sure.
Granted, he didn't end up with the Yankees, but he's with the Dodgers, and he should do some great things.
Yeah, listen, and I think I want to just somewhat tie a bow in this conversation with this, and somewhat my issue with baseball at a larger. I have plenty of issues with the game too. I feel like it hasn't moved with the times in some regard. But you shut Pete Rose, arguably one of the greatest hitters in the history of the game, out of the Hall of Fame for something he did as a manager. You can say that he broke the rules, but he did that as a manager, not as a player. I don't think it should affect his playing career. That's just me personally. But then you fast forward all of a sudden to the 90s. What was one of the most exciting baseball seasons any of us ever watched? Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa home run race, right? You turned a blind eye to all of that during that time, and then retroactively after the fact kind of tried to go and punish all those guys. You knew what was going on. There were reports all over. There's still a famous interview, you can go find it on YouTube, of Mark McGwire doing an interview right in front of his locker, and right up in the top thing is multiple supplements that were actually found out to be banned later that were sitting up on the top of his locker. It's like, baseball, don't act like you didn't know. But then you go through all this crusade of cleaning up the game. And again, for the record, I'm hoping Shohei Ohtani comes out clean in this too. Mm-hmm. And MLB is doing its own investigation. I have to sit there though and question, with a sport that's dropped in both viewership and popularity since I believe it is 2007, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. They've dropped every year in their viewerships. They're now third fiddle in the United States behind both the NFL and the NBA. And they have to watch out because college football is soon encroaching upon their territory too as well. I do have to wonder how thorough of an investigation they're going to do on Shohei, because they can't really afford to lose their biggest star. Because without Shohei, I just don't really see the larger reason for why people want to watch baseball. I don't say this to people. My dad, diehard baseball fans. My first ever is my favorite sport. And I don't want to spend the whole time on this conversation, but baseball does need to realize its whole kind of arbitrary process. We are going to police, we aren't going to police, the unwritten rules. It's just kind of make up your minds, because at the same time, we're sitting there looking at somebody like a Pete Rose story, for an example. But then in football, we call the greatest coach and the greatest quarterback of all time, who both got caught in large scandals, we call him the greatest of all time.
But, okay, listen, remember this, right?
Sure.
Even what's being alleged, nothing was gambled on baseball,
yes,
right? And if the gambling was occurring in other sports, there's been one or two incidents in the past,
sure,
and they've only been a fine,
yep,
right? So from the baseball side, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think where the issue is going to come into play is sending money to this booking agency.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Especially if it didn't have a legal, if it wasn't.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the federal government is involved now, so they're gonna want they're gonna sink their teeth into something. So let's see what it ends up being.
Yeah, I'm with you. And listen, I do really hope that Shohei Ohtani gets out of this clean. And yeah, maybe if baseball gets a little bit more prominent, maybe we'll try to pick a topic here and there to talk about it if we can.
I mean, listen, the Yankees.
Yeah, we can talk about the Yankees.
You know?
I mean, but let me wait till opening day, maybe a couple of games. I want to talk about the Yankees.